You'll just see that we've just had a message pop up to say that we're recording tonight's session. I hope that is okay with everybody. It's a really good opportunity for us to be able to share the recording on our website, so people who may have wanted to come and just couldn't be available can see the presentations, but also most importantly hear the conversations after the presentations. So welcome everybody for coming, and thank you for spending an hour of your time with us this evening. The way that we're going to run this is I've got Suzanne from the Leicestershire Partnership Trust. She's from the School Aged Immunisation Programme, and Viv Robbins from the Public Health team. And they've got a presentation each that they're going to walk us through that talks about what COVID is, what the vaccination is about, some of the practicalities, some of the side effects, and the safety aspects of it. And then we've got plenty of time for you to ask questions. If you want to use the chat whilst the presentation's going, we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll respond to questions in the chat. Or if you're at the end of it, if you want to use your raise your hand function on the system, then please do that, and you can ask your question in person. Really happy to take them either way, but we'll get straight into it then, and I'll hand over to Suzanne. And Suzanne, thank you for your presentation.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Caroline. So I'm Suzanne Netherland. I work in Leicester Partnership NHS Trust, and I support as a clinical lead for the 12 to 15-year-old COVID programme. So I've got a few slides really just to talk through with you around what COVID is, practicalities of how we're delivering the vaccine, etc. So as a starting point, this one just really identifies what COVID is. And as it says, it's an infectious respiratory disease. Now, very few children and young people who do get COVID infection do go on to have a severe illness, so severe disease. So that's only very, very few children. And one of the key aims of offering the vaccination to students and young people is to try and reduce the amount of time lost in education and time off school. And to equally try and reduce the risk of spreading this within the schools. So the programme will therefore help protect young people by getting vaccinated, and it will also help the wider community in supporting in protection, especially during the winter months when there is lots of other little viruses around. Thank you. Next slide. So how are we planning to run the on offer the sessions? So first and foremost, the vaccine that we will be using is Pfizer vaccine, and that's the one that's been licensed for children and young people of this age range. We are aiming to run the vaccination sessions from schools, so from the school or educational setting that your child or young person attends. And we're aiming to achieve that, complete it by the end of November. You may already have received via your school a consent form or a link for a consent form, and we would really encourage you to sort of discuss it with your young person, your child, to sort of engage in joint conversation about consenting and completing a form. And one of the key things that we do really encourage is for the, once the decision is made, for the consent form to be returned as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you. So on the day of the session, and all schools have been advised of the proposed date for us to visit. There's a team of very trained and experienced skilled vaccinators who work in the school age immunisation service who'll be delivering the vaccine. And they are very skilled in supporting children, young people with any questions or concerns about the vaccine or any additional queries. One of the key things with this vaccine, and particularly if you've had it yourself, is that you have to be observed for 15 minutes following the vaccination. And so an observation area will be set up in the same vicinity as where the vaccination is given, and that in the schools. And some other key things people ask is, what about the other programs that your child might be eligible to have, i.e. the HPV or the flu? It's just to give assurance that these will continue to be planned and offered, but potentially they'll be moved back a little bit later on in the year. So wouldn't want to cause any concern that they won't go ahead. They will still be offered if your child is eligible for those. Thank you. So some really frequently asked questions around the vaccine and the programme is it safe? So this vaccine went through very rigorous safety checks with a regulatory body called the Medicines and Healthcare Products, and it has been confirmed as being very, very safe and effective for this age range. And as it suggests in the slide, it went through a real rigorous review to check on safety, quality, and the effectiveness of vaccine in this age group. Thank you. So another frequently asked questions is, what are the side effects? Now, like all medicines and vaccines, there can sometimes be side effects. It doesn't mean that you will have the side effects. Some children and people do, others don't. Most of the time, these are very mild and short term, but as I say, not everybody does get them. But some of the most common side effects do include your arm where you're vaccinated feeling quite heavy, a little bit painful and tender. We tend to offer the vaccination in the non-writing arm or the non-prominent arm. And sometimes this heaviness lasts around about 1 or 2 days. Sometimes you can feel a little bit tired, a bit headachy, and just general aches and mild flu-like symptoms. But usually these have actually disappeared within 1 to 2 days. Thank you. So another key question is, who is eligible? So at this current point in time, it is all children aged 12 to 15 years. And that means that they're 12 on the date of the session that we visit the school. And for this age range, with healthy 12 to 15-year-olds, we only need to offer 1 dose of the vaccine. The service who will be delivering the vaccinations are the School Age Immunisation Service, who work within Leicester Partnership NHS Trust. And they are very, very professed and expert at delivering school-based programmes and have done so for many, many years. Equally, you may also be aware that the age 16 and 17-year-olds have already been offered the vaccine and 1 dose only. Thank you. So another quick question that people often ask is the protocol for students around parental consent and consenting for the vaccine. So we really, really do try and encourage children, young people and their parents and carers to have a joint discussion and joint conversation about the vaccine together as a family. There's an awful lot of information available around about the vaccine and around consent. And there's some really reliable websites such as the Gov.uk website, NHS website, and another very key website is the Health for Teens, which has an awful lot of information on about vaccinations, about consent, and it's really, really a good website, which I really would encourage you to sort of view. So one of the key messages is to have a good conversation with your child, young person about the vaccine, and so it becomes a joint decision making between yourselves and your child. Thank you. So this really just lists a few sort of key information points that yourselves and your child, young person can access, which will help you in enabling an informed decision to be made. So as we said in the earlier slide, there is a Health for Teens website, a lot of national government, a lot of information on national government websites, e-leaflets, and also on the LPT social media accounts, a lot of information there. Thank you. So another key question is what happens if my child, young person, isn't at school on the day of the vaccination because they're unwell or absent. So we are aiming that every child, young person that we receive a consent form from will be offered the vaccination, and we're just working through the logistics of that. If your child or young person is unfortunately absent on the day. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
I just need to take myself off mute. So thank you very much, Suzanne. We've got loads of questions coming in the chat. That's really good. I'm keeping an eye on them as Suzanne's been talking. We're going to swap the presentation over to Viv's presentation. Let's get the presentations out of the way, and then we'll come back to the questions in the chat. Okay, thank you. Over to Viv. Are you there, Viv?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And I have tried to keep a bit of an eye on the chat as well, so I will try and cover as many points as I can, but apologies if we don't cover them straight away. We will make sure that we get through all the questions that you have. So thanks for having me tonight. So my name's Vivian Robbins. I'm consultant in public health here at Leicestershire County Council. And what I wanted to do was just give you a bit of an update in terms of some of the key public health messages that we want to share with you around the COVID
about the vaccine.
And also just relay some of the discussions that we've had and some of the key messages and concerns and queries, I suppose, that we've had going through the process. So first of all, one of the key questions that comes up time and time again, and is an absolutely valid question, is around the vaccine. Are they safe and effective? And what we just want to do is really reassure you that although the COVID vaccines were developed in a much quicker way than a lot of other vaccines, that no corners were cut in terms of how they were made and how they were developed. So there have been a range of trials that have supported this. So the MHRA is the regulatory body in the UK that basically oversees any new vaccine or medicine. And there are really clear processes that any vaccine or medicine has to go through to be able to come out onto the NHS and to be used in the NHS. And what I just wanted to reassure people around is that all of those phases of those trials were completed when this COVID vaccination was generated. It's just that we had the world working towards us and working collectively to try and drive this together. So whereas before those processes would be done first sort of one after the other, some of them were overlapped. And what that meant was that the time that was needed to develop the vaccine was shortened. And instead of waiting till the end of the process where they looked at all the evidence together, it was a rolling process. So as new evidence came through, the MRHA looked at that and reviewed that and basically got things moving a little bit quicker. But really to reassure you that no corners were cut in terms of the development of the vaccine, and it was developed in the same way that other vaccines would have done. So your flu vaccine that is developed every year. Also, there's a tremendous amount of data now. Millions of people have had the vaccine, and it is seen to be very effective, and very, very effective in comparison to the other vaccines we have that we use regularly and extremely safe. We have acknowledged that there are some side effects that have been reported. And the reason why we have seen these side effects is because they are extremely rare, and we have vaccinated millions and millions of people. And we have a really good system to identify if there are any issues or concerns with the vaccines that have reported them through. So you may have heard around the blood clotting and low platelet issue with the AstraZeneca vaccine, or you may have heard about the heart inflammation concerns with the Pfizer vaccine. And we acknowledge that they are there. But what we do want to really reiterate is these are extremely rare side effects, and we're talking a few people per million. And just to put that into context, it is always around the balance of risk and benefit. And what we are strongly suggesting is that the balance of benefit is significantly outweighing any risk here. And in terms of the level of risk, we're talking a few per million. So it's about the same as getting hit by lightning. And so it's just to try and put that into context in terms of we all have to make these risk decisions every day. And obviously this is one that we would, you know, advise for you to consider. So next slide, please. So in terms of what the benefits are, I just wanted to really support what the evidence is saying in terms of how effective these vaccines are. And this is particularly important when I think about, well, I was just looking through the rates of COVID at the moment, particularly across Leicestershire, that are significantly higher than the national rate. And if we look at where the cases are being driven, we see that there's a lot of cases, in the 11 to 16-year-old population at the moment. And fundamentally, the majority of that is because the vaccine programme is being so successful. And what the vaccine does is it reduces your risk of actually catching COVID. So your risk of actually getting the infection is reduced by about 55 to 70% is what the evidence is suggesting. If you do catch it, because no vaccine is 100%, and we acknowledge that. These are great vaccines, but nothing is 100%. It really significantly reduces the severity of disease. So it means that you don't get as poorly as you would have done if you'd have had caught COVID without the vaccine. And the evidence is showing that 90% of people that need hospitalisation and sort of intensive care support is reduced by 90% if they have the vaccine. And also when it comes to mortality, that goes up to 90–95%. So in terms of the protection against severe disease, the COVID vaccine is incredibly effective. The other benefits is it reduces the likelihood to pass it on. And this is a really important thing to think about when we're talking around our young people, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So the evidence is suggesting there's about a 40% reduction in transmission if you have the vaccine. And the other thing is around risks of long COVID. And what we have found is that people that are vaccinated have less likely to get long COVID, but also if they have had long COVID, that actually the vaccine is actually improving some of their low COVID symptoms. And that can be, you know, a really significant condition for people, which is really like chronic fatigue syndrome, and really can, you know, destabilise how you can go on with your daily life if you do get this condition. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the specific benefits for young people? And obviously that's an important one that we need to discuss today. So many of you will have seen that the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisations came out recently and said that there was less benefit around young people having the vaccine as compared to older people, because we know that young people and healthy young people are quite often are quite often asymptomatic or don't get seriously unwell. So the benefit and risk in that point of view on just a health benefit is a lot more balanced, and I think we need to acknowledge that and be aware of that. But the reason why the vaccination programme has been commissioned for children is not just about the specific health benefits, it's about how the COVID pandemic is affecting on their wider health and well-being. And that particularly is around, you know, the fact that we know that many children are missing quite considerable chunks of time through having COVID, whether it's having it themselves or being contacts and things like that around that. There's also the risk of them developing long COVID, as I've just mentioned, but there's also the condition around how the young people are then mixing with old people and potentially more vulnerable people, and that we know that there's a lot of transmission going on through the community, which is linked to schools and outbreaks at schools. So there is a benefit for the young person, but there's a significant benefit for the wider community as well. Next slide, please. So what are the risks? So as I've touched on this before, there are side effects to the vaccine, and I know Suzanne's talked about some of the short-term side effects. So in terms of, you know, you might have a temperature, you might have a sore arm. I know I had a sore arm for a couple of days after it, I did. You might feel a bit fluey, but other people don't get any side effects. And it is worth considering that depending on how your body responds, you're not going to know whether you're going to get a side effect or not. In terms of the serious side effects, and I know there's been a particular comment around the heart inflammation in the chat. There has been evidence around the heart inflammation with the Pfizer vaccine, but this is incredibly rare, and we're looking at about 8 per million or fewer. So it's a really, really small risk, and we do need to try and put that into context. And when we've looked at the evidence around that, the risk of getting that complication increases if you have 2 doses, which is one of the reasons why the JCVI have suggested that 12 to 17-year-olds only have 1 dose. If it was a case that you were concerned about your young person having these signs and symptoms, so the symptoms you need to look out for are chest pain, shortness of breath, having almost a fast beating heart or fluttering or pounding, then I would suggest that you, particularly within the 7 days after you've had the vaccine, then I would suggest that you do contact your GP, or if you're really concerned, then you do have A&E to go to, but do remember that your GP can support with this, because actually the evidence is suggesting that if you do access healthcare, that people respond really well to this as well. In terms of, so I think that's, and in terms of the long-term side effects, so I'll be open and honest about this, the vaccine's only been on the market for, and only been used for just over, for about a year. We don't know what the side effects are going to be within the next 5 years. However, this isn't, having a vaccine is not a new process. And the thing that I want to reiterate here is that this is not a live vaccine, and there is no plausible mechanism to why we would think that there would be any significant long-term side effects. And this is because we've been vaccinating people for hundreds of years, and particularly when we use non-live vaccine, that's when we know that we've got a really good record of the fact that actually none of these vaccines have had long-term side effects. So we can build on the evidence that we've already previously had to be reassured around that. I think the other thing as well is, let's remember, millions and millions of people have had this vaccine, so they may not have had it for a long time, but a lot of people have had this vaccine, and that's why we are starting to see if there are any rare side effects that have come out. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch then, and I know there were some comments around this in the chat as well, around the menstrual cycle. And I know that there have been discussions around, are there any impacts on the COVID vaccine with the menstrual cycle? Now, anecdotally, we have heard comments around this. So the cycle might be lighter, heavier, it might be a bit earlier, it might be a bit later. Now, we don't know what the exact mechanism is for this, but we think it's highly likely to be something around how the immune response is reacting to the lining of the womb, or how your immune response is altering your hormone levels, which will then trigger how your period is. Now, these are similar responses to how your body would respond if you were poorly, if you were stressed in other situations. And this is also something that we have seen with other vaccines like the HPV vaccine. What we do know is that if you do experience these effects on your menstrual cycle, that they are short-lived, and that the normal cycle will return to normal within 1 or 2 cycles. So they are temporary changes, and there are no known effects on that person's fertility or being able to get pregnant in the future. And we have a lot of evidence now where people who have had the vaccine have been absolutely fine to go on and conceive and have good good pregnancies and live births. The other area around this is that there's no known plausible mechanism for the vaccine to impact on your fertility. And this is through a lot of the data that we've had with other vaccines as well. So just to reassure you that there is no plausible way in which case that the vaccine would affect your fertility. And if we think about how the vaccine works, you are basically introducing something that is unknown to your body. Your body then produces an immune response, and then the vaccine is removed from your body within a couple of days. So the actual components of the vaccine don't stay in your body very long, but what does stay in your body is the memory or your immune response to that. So then if you do see the COVID again at any point, then your body knows how to respond much more quickly to that. The other thing to just be aware of is that, there's lots of evidence now around the COVID vaccine being advised for pregnant women. We know that pregnant women are at higher risk of serious implications for COVID, and we are really recommending those to have that vaccine, because there is, if you have serious complications of COVID, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to have a premature birth. and actually there's a lot of evidence now to demonstrate the benefit of having the vaccination if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, because we've seen how you can pass on some of that immunity that you generate to your baby through the umbilical cord or through your breast milk if you're breastfeeding. So I think that was it for me. I'll hand back to Caroline.
Thank you, Viv. So you're doing a really good job with the questions in the chat. And I've been sitting here looking at seeing if we could group some of these questions together so that we answer them as a whole, because we do want to give them justice. I think the first thing to say is that we absolutely acknowledge that that this is new. This is new for all of us, not just for you as parents, but all of us. This time last year, we weren't talking about a COVID vaccine. We were talking about flu vaccines. We were focused on the things that we absolutely know about. And so the concerns that's coming through the chat in terms of evidence, that particularly the evidence that Viv has been talking about, I think it's important to acknowledge that the evidence is there, and if we go to our website, we've got links to the evidence, and it's national evidence, it's international evidence that we're looking at, and what we're trying to do is answer some of those questions that are particular to you in terms of the anxieties that are coming out. So I've got information all over the place here. Some of the questions that are coming through are around the time, if you've had COVID, or if you're unaware you've had COVID even, what's the time scale? So if you've had COVID, when can you have the test? When can you have the vaccine, sorry? And if you don't know you've had COVID, because we do know that people are asymptomatic with COVID, what's the risk to people if they then have the vaccine? So Viv, I'm going to look to you to answer those, if I might.
Yeah, so sorry. So just so it's unclear, apologies, I've got a little one who's needs to go to bed. Yeah, so are you saying what's the time between if you have COVID and when you can have the vaccine?
Yeah, and also we know people are asymptomatic, so if they've had COVID and don't know about it, is there any risk of them having the vaccine then?
Yeah, so I think comes back to the fact that it's not a live vaccine. So I think there is precautionary evidence that, and precautionary advice that if you know that you have had COVID, that you would wait 28 days from your PCR test to when you have your vaccine. That's if you know it, if you know that you've had it. If you're asymptomatic and you don't know it, you're generally feeling well, then you would be fine to have the vaccine. Your body's responding well, and all this will do is just to build your immune response further. So it may be that you might feel it'll be a little bit more load on your immune response because you're already dealing with COVID potentially. But if you're dealing with that well, then you should be fine to have the vaccine. But if you do know about it, then wait your 28 days.
Thank you, Viv. Thanks for that one. A number of questions coming through about the process. Either that we've given you a date and we've cancelled the date, or what's happening if you change your mind and want to have your child vaccinated and we've already done your school, those sorts of things. So I think I'm going to kind of caveat. I'm going to come to Suzanne on this, but caveat it in terms of the fact that this is a programme that the rollout of it, not all of the clinical stuff or anything, but the practical rollout of this is we're still working through it on a day-by-day basis. And our first starting point is to go into schools where we know that we've got a relationship with schools and deliver it to those schools there. We absolutely know that there are going to be children who won't be in school that day for whatever reason, or you haven't made your mind up yet and you change your mind at a later date. As some people have put in the chat, we are going to have to do something for those children, but at this point in time, we haven't confirmed what that is going to be. And we're still working with the national team as to how they want us to roll that out locally. It could be through a pop-up. You'll know from some of the adult vaccinations that we've done that there are pop-ups that we've put in place. So we could make use of that. We could make use of all the the plethora of vaccination sites that we've got across the region. But at this moment in time, we're just focusing on doing it in schools, and we'll come back out to you with the information about what you can do to play catch up. We call it mopping it up. So we'll be mopping up children all over the place, I'm sure, but we haven't got a plan for that yet. Suzanne, is there anything you want to add to that? Have I missed anything?
No, that was really, really, yeah, no, covered everything. Thank you.
Oh, good. Trying to take some questions off you. So another question around 16-year-olds and 11-year-olds. So Suzanne, you might be able to kind of help with the response here. That we've got children that don't fit into the 12 to 15. So what's happening with the 11-year-olds? What's happening with 16-year-olds?
So as we've identified, this programme currently is for 12 to 15-year-olds, and for the child or young person have to be 12 on the date of the visit to the school. But we recognise obviously some children will be moving towards their 12th birthday, so we will be working through some plans to ensure that if we have received a consent for that child and they are 12, that we will work to ensure that that child is vaccinated. We are very much led with this programme of how we can deliver it upon under our legal agreement. And for this programme, it is very much a 12 to 15-year-old, and it is that rather than academic years, whereas the flu is very much academic years, this programme isn't. Can you just excuse me? My kitchen door's opened and it's creating a lot of noise. Just bear with me.
Thanks, Suzanne. Just while Suzanne's doing that, one of the things I was going to add in terms of the programme, you don't know what, somebody's popped in the chat, we don't really know why the school's been cancelled. I think it's fair to say that we've had a really, really good response to this from parents consenting for their children, and so it's taken us a few days to kind of settle into the process of doing it, and you know, that's great, but it also talks to the fact of why we've got to come back. Sorry, Suzanne, do you want to go back to what you said? I was just filling in there.
No, sorry. So no, really, it's this programme is very much related by age rather than academic years, which the flu is. That's the difference with this one. With flu, we sort of did go from reception to year 11. And this one with COVID is very much age specific, 12 to 15.
Thank you. And 16-year-olds can get it through, they can book that through the website. They go to the website, they can book that, and they can go to the GP or to their or to any of our the vaccination site at the People Centre. So you'll be given options for that, won't you, Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Still scrolling through some of these themes. Questions, there's a lot of questions around evidence in terms of the risks to children. Viv, you did touch on it around the questions coming in around the myocarditis, so any inflammation of the heart, any impact on the menstruation cycle, or anything in terms of fertility and those sorts of things, and some of the more severe, you know, there are the questions around, you know, is this what's the risk of my child dying from this? Do you want to kind of pick that up?
Yeah, no problem. So I think first of all, it's just to really reiterate that the severe side effects of the vaccine are extremely rare. So the data that we've got in the 12 to 17-year-old age group looks at about an 8 per million in cases of the myocarditis. So I think it's just being aware that there are these side effects and we need to acknowledge those, but just putting it into context in terms of they are incredibly rare. And it is always about a discussion around the balance of risk and benefit. And that is an individual discussion. One thing that I would really say though is that there is, I know there's been conflicting advice in terms of what the JCVI came out with, and I know that will understandably make parents question that. And I think the balance around why we have, why the vaccination programme has been commissioned for this age group is not just about, the health benefits. So it is really about understanding those wider benefits on the wider health and social, wider health and well-being benefits of those young people. And there are benefits in terms of long COVID as well. So we do know that young people do get long COVID, and that can be, you know, quite a limiting condition for those young people while they're working through that. So again, it is about the balance of risk. If you are concerned about signs and symptoms, if your young person has had that the vaccination and you are concerned around that, so they have symptoms in terms of chest pain, shortness of breath, and, you know, fast beating, fluttering heart, anything like that, try and get into your GP. I can see there were concerns around getting into your GP. Fundamentally, if you are really concerned, you've always got 999 to deal with, or you've got A&E. So you've always got those options. And what I would say is just make sure that you highlight that your young person has had the vaccine, particularly if it's within a 7-day window, because they will be people are aware of this now. They know how to treat this, and they know how to manage that as quickly as they can for you. But just reiterating, this is an extremely rare complication of the vaccine. So just to think about that in terms of your balance and risk.
Thanks.
Did you want me to go about the menstrual cycle again?
Please, yes, yeah. Keep going.
So in terms of the menstrual cycle, I think it's there is anecdotal evidence to say that it might have an impact on people's menstrual cycle. So it could be heavier, it could be lighter, it could be shorter, it could be longer. But what we do know is that this is something that we have seen with other vaccines, and this is something that we have seen just generally if you are run down, if you've caught another virus or bug, or, you know, if you're particularly stressed. So we do know that there is a difference in terms of how your immune response is interacting with your womb, and also how your hormone balance works, and that impacts on your menstrual cycle. So we don't think it's necessarily the vaccine per se, it's about how your body is responding to the vaccine. And that is a normal immune response. And we would see that with lots of different things. So if you're run down, it might be that your menstrual cycle is tweaked a bit. But again, we know that, you know, within 1 or 2 cycles, it comes back to normal. And just to reiterate, that there is really strong evidence, and I know a lot of the Royal Colleges have come out around this to support this, in terms of there is no plausible mechanism to it impacting on your long-term fertility. So we know that the way that the vaccine works is it's in your body for a couple of days, your body reacts to it, it produces its immune response, it develops that memory or that immune response to that, but then the vaccine is excreted or removed from your body within a couple of days. So it's not hanging around to be able to have any long-term effects on your fertility. Sorry, Karen, was there another thing? I can't remember what the other thing was. In terms of
there was myocarditis, menstruation and fertility, there were the 3. Yeah, so I think we covered those. Thank you. So I've got some more themes coming through. Thank you. We're not at the bottom of the list yet. Kind of following on from some of the things that Viv was saying, there's a lot in the chat about in terms of, you know, the JCVI guidance and whether or not we're compliant with the JCVI guidance. I think that what we have to say is that it's the chief medical officers that have made this decision based on information from JCVI, and that's what we're charged to roll out. So, you know, as clinicians ourselves, you know, we support that view, and so that's the information that we're sharing today. Someone's put in the chat which website. I think we might be able to pop on the website link into the chat, so people have got links to websites if they need that information. But another thing that's coming through, and Suzanne, I think this is one for you, is around consent. So there's a couple of practical issues around consent. If they've already consented and they've missed it, do they need to consent again? Or but I think the popular one that's coming through is around the Gillick competencies and how we would assess that and what we would do if the child wants to have it and the parent doesn't. So over to you on that one.
Okay, so if we have a consent, an active consent, then we will always strive to ensure and offer that vaccination with a positive consent. Now, the Gillick test or Gillick competence has been around for many years, and basically it's a test which sort of checks a young person's capacity to make an informed decision, ensuring that all the appropriate information has been provided and that they have good understanding. Now, one of the very key things with any vaccination, not just COVID, but any other secondary age vaccination, is that sort of joint decision making between the young person and the parent, and that together they discuss the vaccinations and they come to an informed decision about consenting to it. If there is a difference of opinion, we will always encourage the young person, to talk to the parent, and the nurse and the practitioner will always encourage that joint ownership of that, and will always, potentially give the parents a call if there's some uncertainty there. But the Gillick test it's been a legal term for many years, I think way back to around about 1970s. So it's not something that is actually new in regarding to consent. And the service and the team will always follow all the correct guidance in our Green Book and the national guidance around consent.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, lots of questions on consent. Literally, there's one in front of me. If we changed our mind, it was another one. If you don't consent to have if you consent to have your child vaccinated on the day, but it doesn't happen on the day, do they have to consent again for when you go back? So no, you're shaking your head on that one.
No, because if they've already given consent, that will remain an active consent on the online consent system.
And if the child changes their mind because they don't want the injection, we understand that as well, don't we?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, good. Right. Some other themes coming through around allergies and an eczema, those sorts of things. And it is absolutely safe to give the vaccine with those sorts of things. If you've got children with some pre-existing conditions that you're particularly worried about, and there's a couple that have been popped in the chat, they're quite specific, then that's the point that you need to have the conversation with your healthcare professional, because they'll be familiar with your child's illness and know exactly what advice to give with that. I wouldn't want to give kind of general advice for something that's quite specific around some conditions. Another question that's coming out is about COVID and flu, COVID and HPV. And what's the process? What's the risk of having those vaccines? Who'd like to come in on that one? So Viv, yeah.
Do you want me to have a go?
Yeah.
Sorry, Caroline. One thing I just wanted to add in terms of your allergy conversation as well is that just to reassure people that there are very few people that can't have the COVID vaccines. So because it's not a live vaccine, and obviously a lot of the data that's come out has shown that it's only if you have a specific allergic reaction to the ingredients of the vaccine is when you can't have the vaccine. So actually it's a really small amount of people that can't have that. And in terms of the gap between COVID vaccine and HPV or flu vaccine, so the guidance has come out that if it operationally works better, so if you're in a clinic and you can have your flu and your COVID vaccine at the same time, then the Green Book or the guidance which sort of allows us to do that says you can do that. The general guidance is that you would have a 7-day window between vaccines, particularly if it's a live vaccine. So the flu nasal flu for the one in children is a live vaccine, whereas the COVID one is a non-live vaccine. So it might be that you have a 7-day window within that, but we need to remember that it's not a live vaccine for your COVID vaccine, so it is a very safe vaccine to have. I don't know if Suzanne wants to add anything to that.
Nothing to add, no, Viv, thank you.
Thank you, Viv, on that one. So another theme that's coming through is kind of this question that if we know a lot of children have had COVID, and we've seen a lot of it in children, are they actually building up antibodies? So therefore they don't need the vaccine. So I think that's a really good question. Viv, I'm literally looking at you to think about answering that one.
Yeah, no problem. I think there's the general rule would be, please have the vaccine. Even if you've had COVID before, you will be developing an immune response. There's absolutely no question around that. But what we don't know is how long you will develop that immune response, and different people, depending on what type of COVID they've had or how long or how serious a condition they've had, will all produce different immune responses. So the one thing that I would say is the immune response that you develop for actually having COVID might be slightly different to the immune response that you develop when you have your COVID vaccine. And what we do know is there's different variants circulating around with COVID. And actually, we know that the vaccines that we've got are very effective around some of the variants that we've got, but also can give you protection to variants that you might not have had. So I would strongly recommend, even if you've had COVID, that you have the vaccine as well.
I'm on mute. So there is a specific question in the chat from a parent who wants a specific question asking about the Pfizer test. I think what I'd like to suggest is that if we can share an email address that we can ask that specific question, because I'm not 100% sure what you mean by the Pfizer test, and we probably just need to have a little bit of a chat about that. If there's a concern about that, we can probably do that. I'm still seeing questions in the chat about why has my school been cancelled, and it is absolutely because of the uptake that has been done. We've got our school age immunisation team. They're used to doing year groups for vaccines in school, and we've had to completely turn them on their head and say they're going to have to do 12 to 15-year-olds, and they're doing full years at school. And also we're running the booster program for adults. It's a lot of resource going into this, and we're having to make sure that we're using that resource properly to be able to do it. But unfortunately, it's meant that we've had to move things around so that we're making best use of that resource. And I really do apologise to parents and to your children that have got themselves geared up for their vaccine, and then we're kind of pulling the plug a little bit. We will come back, and if you've consented, you don't need to come. We don't need to redo the consent if we're coming back at a later date. So that is absolutely fine. But our apologies for any of the inconvenience. It wasn't our intention. It's the way that it's played out locally, and we're working day and night, it feels like, to try and resolve that. Okay, so team, any more?
I think just to confirm one of the queries about the consent form. It is sent through via the school. I think there's a lady in the chat asking how they receive it. The link is sent through the school, just to confirm that.
Lovely, thank you.
Sorry, Caroline, and one thing I was just thinking, I don't know whether the Pfizer test was around the PCR test. I know we've had questions before around, if you have the vaccine, does it mean that then if you go for a PCR test or a lateral flow test that you will come back positive? And it's just to reassure you that those tests are looking for actual components of the virus. they're not looking for your antibody response. So they're testing on slightly different things. So even if you've had your vaccination and you then go for a PCR test or a lateral flow test, that won't be positive because of your vaccine. It'll only be positive if you've actually got COVID yourself.
That's great, thank you. How many, one's just popped in there, how many doses for 12 to 15-year-olds?
Just the one. So all healthy 12 to 15-year-olds are just having the one. Children in 12 to 15 who are classed as clinically vulnerable or will potentially be offered 2 doses, but for this healthy 12 to 15 age range, it is 1.
Thank you. And the so I was just going to add something to that in terms of it's gone completely. We've still got some questions around what are the risks to children catching COVID naturally versus those risks from the virus. And I think, you know, this is kind of back to the data that the chief medical officers have shared. It is the right thing to do for children. It's the right thing to do for us all to be vaccinated, to reduce the risk to ourselves and to others. And that's why we're doing this, and that's the kind of the bedrock of our vaccination programme. Anything, colleagues, to add to that?
Yeah, I'd just add to that, Caroline. And I think the other thing to add is you're still building your child's immune response. So as much as we know that children are most likely to get much milder symptoms to COVID and are much less likely to get things like long COVID, we can't rule that out. And I think there is something around it's more the impact that it has on you know, disrupting your child's education, which has already been significantly disrupted over the pandemic. We want to do as much as we can to prevent that, and also it's also the link around having your child as protected as they can be, so that then they are not transmitting onwards. So we know the evidence says that if you are vaccinated, that one, you're less likely to catch it, but you're also less likely to transmit it. And so for me, I know for me, I've got, you know, elderly parents, and if I could get my kids vaccinated so that they are reducing the risk to them as well, I would consider doing that. So, and I would do that. But I think it's an individual discussion, and you know, we're not here to tell people what to do. We're just there to try and, you know, give them the most evidence that they can to make the right choice for them and their family.
Thank you, Viv. Yeah, that's really important. I remembered what I was going to say in response to Suzanne's question, the question about how many vaccines for our 12 to 15-year-olds, because a question came up on a webinar we did earlier about whether or not there's a booster. So we know there's a booster for adults, but we don't know yet whether or not there's a booster program for children. We're just at the start of a vaccination program for children, and we will have more information as that comes out to us. So we don't know. We're working on the one, and we're still working on making sure that we're going back to be able to go into those schools where parents and children feel they may have missed it. So yeah, kind of rest assured that we will come out with more information as to how we can pick that up. So I know that the team have been putting things in the chat about where you can get access to some information. It's on the Leicester City CCG website. So if people want to go onto that, they can access information there. And then if there is another, we've got other webinars and other opportunities, but people can put things into us at any time. So I'm not seeing any more themes, and I'm starting to see people go. Oh, question about why they can't book into a vaccination clinic like the adults. That's a request of the government at the moment. That's how they want us to roll out the vaccination programme. So we're focusing it on schools. On a personal perspective, I'm hoping that we get a little bit more flexibility and an opportunity to use other sites. But at the moment, we've got a legal framework that we've got to work within, and that's just to focus on 12 to 15-year-olds and 12 to 15-year-olds who are 12 to 15 now, and then we will work through what that means for other people. Okay. So,
Caroline, just to add, there was a question about HPV, a child having it on the 21st of the 9th, and could they have the COVID? Yes, they could. That's, you know, that's 7 days apart, so it would be absolutely fine to receive the COVID vaccination.
thank you for that, Suzanne. I'm just sorry, I've got the messages all over the place here. Trying to read those and make sure that I'm picking up. There's questions, there's comments coming up in the chat in terms of licensing. So you know, we are working to a national programme, and we're using it under the framework that has been agreed for us locally. The last couple of minutes, I've got one person with a hand up, so I haven't really been able to offer people with a hand up. But Liz, just on a final point, do you want to ask something?
Thank you. It was just a little bit of clarification. You've kind of it's about consent. My son has just turned 12, so we'll be in the catchment for this. He has very recently had COVID. And I know the date that you're scheduled to come to his school is within this 28 days. So on a practical basis, if I say yes on the consent now, do I then tell him on the day, but you can't have it yet? Or do I actually not give consent now? But then how does he get caught up in the later mopping up? That's my sort of dilemma. I don't want to fill in the consent to say yes when I know the date that you're scheduled to come to his school is too soon for him.
Thanks, Liz. And Chris has just popped in the chat. That's his question as well. So, Suzanne, over to you on that one.
I think the best approach would be to we have a community IMS inbox, which the letter that would have been sent to all parents from the school around completing the consent form has that email link on. I think if you email the fact that, you know, your son has had COVID and it's going to be out of the 28 days, we can record that on the system, so as evidence that you've shared that with us. And then what we will, when we also do a triaging of all forms, and we will know therefore that when we do visit the school that we won't be able to offer it to your son because we're not within that 28 days. But because we've got an active consent, then we will be able to look at offering it when you're outside of that 28 days.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Good, that has answered your question. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Liz, for raising that. Okay, so it's bang on 7 o'clock. I'd just like to say thank you to Suzanne and Viv for answering those questions. You've done a tremendous job at being able to do that. Thank you for the team that who've been collating them in the background for us so that we can try and answer as many as possible. But also thank you to you for putting the questions in the chat and taking time out of your evening to come and talk to us, even if it's remotely. If there are any other things that people need raising, please put it through the processes that we've got. And but thank you very much for your attention and your interest, and I hope we've been able to resolve some of your anxieties. So have a lovely evening, everyone, and good night.